Okay, well, today we are talking about affordable housing and the push to build more housing by Palo Alto. And we're really pleased to be joined by Fran Wagstaff. She's the retired president of the nonprofit Peninsula Housing Coalition. Fran, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleased to be here.
So I would like to just hear a little bit from you about the housing that your nonprofit developed when you were the president there, just to give us a sense of what you've done and what's been happening on the peninsula.
Well, certainly, the 25 plus years that I worked there, we developed something like 6,000 units of affordable housing, most of it rental housing, a little bit of ownership housing in there. And it was all over the Bay Area. We started right in Palo Alto. Our office used to be right on Sherman Avenue.
Oh, wow.
We started building subsidized housing. And then as the programs changed, we kept up with the change and started using the low-income tax credit program, which has been the main driver of affordable housing production all over the country. And that really gave us the tools to build a lot of stuff that's not involved with HUD. They may use subsidies from HUD, but it really serves a broader spectrum of people. So it worked very well. And by virtue of working all over the Bay Area and all the way down into Monterey and up into the East Bay, we were able to see a lot of different approaches to how to get affordable housing built, and some work better than others.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear about some of these approaches. What are some of the approaches that different cities that MidPen has worked with that you feel have really worked? Like, is it?
Well, the biggest challenge that we have with huge competition for property in the whole Bay Area is finding sites. Some cities have moved to get affordable housing by either acquiring sites or sites that they may own themselves that are surplus for one reason or the other. For example, we built on a former corporation yard in Redwood City. We built on sites that cities owned that they no longer needed for one reason or the other. And some cities have just gone out and bought sites and then zoned them for affordable housing and requested proposals from various nonprofits and for-profits, and then proceeded to develop those sites. Other cities have used affordable housing overlays, which I think has also been quite successful. So there's different approaches, and they all work in one way or the other. So I think there's always local government that's involved in getting affordable housing built. Without local government being supportive, it just doesn't happen.
But local government in Palo Alto, the officials often talk about Palo Alto being built out, which makes it seem like it's really hard to get sites, which is kind of the number one challenge that you just cited. So do you have any confidence that, given that Palo Alto is pretty much developed, as from the city council's perspective, that it's even possible to kind of purchase the kind of sites that are needed to address the affordable housing shortage?
Well, I keep hearing that we're built out. However, everywhere I look, I see things under construction. Not affordable housing, but other things under construction. What's happened is the city is at an age and there's enough economic pressure for new construction that it's happening everywhere. So we really have to think in terms of redevelopment, which is happening right in front of our eyes. Everywhere I look, I see things being torn down and redeveloped. Part of that redevelopment needs to be affordable housing. It can't just be commercial buildings and hotels, you know. It has to be affordable housing because we have a lot of workers in the city that have to commute long distances and that are commuting out in every direction. We're impacting the housing costs all around us, not just here, because people have to travel long distances and come back into the city. That causes traffic. So even if you're an environmentalist and you don't care about affordable housing, you should start thinking about affordable housing because it's definitely impacting the lack of affordable housing is impacting the environment. So I think that there's an opportunity for the city to look, instead of looking backwards at this suburban community that we all think we are, to realize that we are a small city now. We have a very thriving economy. That economy depends on people being able to work here and afford to live here. So I think that the socially responsible thing to do is to plan going forward. And the things that are happening socially. You know, transportation is changing, how people travel. You know, we have Uber, we have all these lifts. There's a possibility of living in places without driving everywhere. And the commutes have gotten so long that that's more attractive all the time. I think self-driving cars in the future are really going to change the amount of parking we need. But I don't see that being incorporated in the planning that's going on right now.
But it seems like you're suggesting that affordable housing is needed to kind of address the traffic challenges, the transportation challenges, the fact that a lot of people commute. But I feel like some of the people who would resist more housing of any sort would kind of use the same kind of conditions for their argument. They would say things are so congested already that, if anything, we need to build less. How would you counter that argument?
Well, if people want to have less congestion, they better stop bringing so many jobs into this town, you know. I mean, the congestion is coming from the jobs. It's not coming from people living here. And, you know, we really are still thinking of Palo Alto as the suburb. But, you know, we're an urban area. We have lots of jobs. We have all the characteristics of a small city. And we have to provide, I mean, I think it's really a social justice issue that people need affordable housing. You know, you can't just have a city that's all rich people. You know, our comfort depends on having good services. We need schools. We need our children to have teachers who can afford to live here. We have people who work in the service sector that, you know, feed us lunch, that they work in the supermarket. Those people have to live somewhere. You know, and to say that they need to go live somewhere else, I think it's just not just. You know, we should accommodate people that are part of this community, people that have lived here, that have grown up here. It can't just be just one social sector that ends up living here. That's not a healthy community in my mind.
Yeah, one thing that I'm curious about is, are we in a time where just the economic climate is the large factor in kind of pushing back against affordable housing being built? I mean, is it different now than it was 10 years ago? Is that primarily economic, or is there just a lack of willingness somehow on the part of cities?
Well, you know, what I've seen is the cities that really want affordable housing get affordable housing.
Okay.
And there's definitely cities that are better than others. For example, working with Sunnyvale, with Mountain View, it's been a terrific experience, you know. They've been
what do they
really
do?
supportive, huh?
How are they supporting affordable housing? What is it
They
that they do?
supported affordable housing in all different ways. They waive fees, ease of getting zoning, expedited zoning, affordable housing overlays, really being supportive, investing some of their housing funds into affordable housing. The fee waivers are huge because fees are very high now. They really add to the cost of housing. Allowing for densities that made the projects financially viable. Assisting us in identifying sites that would be good for affordable housing, encouraging us to do it. So they didn't sit back, you know, their defenses up in terms of, you know, prove to me that you can do this. They're actually actively pursuing sites, pursuing opportunities. And then cities have an enormous power through zoning. When they put an affordable housing overlay on a site, what I saw cities do, I saw this in Mountain View, what I saw them do is they identified certain sites as being partially having an affordable housing overlay, partially market rate housing, larger sites. They changed the zoning on that affordable housing overlay from 20 units an acre to 50 units an acre. Now imagine that happening in Palo Alto. It could happen, but I haven't seen it happen, okay? So that means all kinds of waivers for some of the other requirements that they had. They did that to create the possibility of affordable senior housing, which was a goal of the city. And they just went about it in a smart way. So the developers who had these sites kept coming back to the city and saying, we can't build affordable housing. They brought letters from their banks saying, we won't finance affordable housing, you know. And the cities kept saying, go back and try harder. And after 3 or 4 times that they did this, you know what? They sold the site to a nonprofit to build the housing, and it got built. So, you know, you have to be firm about your goals and say, this is what the city needs. And if, in fact, this is what the city needs, we will use the powers we have as a city to make it happen.
Well, this year, Palo Alto City Council tried to become more firm and set its goals when it adopted creation of housing as its top priority and created a goal of 300 new units, not just affordable, but all housing. First of all, I'm curious what you think of this goal and whether you think Palo Alto will achieve it. But also, I wanted to ask you if there's if you think the council as it stands right now is kind of being as proactive as those in some of the other cities you mentioned. Like, are you hopeful by what's been happening in the last few months, basically politically?
Well, I think the power that the cities have is the power to zone. They have the power to plan, they have the power to zone, and the power to tax. They have a lot of powers. But the zoning power is really the most important one. So if they really want to see housing, they have to look at the areas where they think multifamily housing is appropriate, and they have to zone that stuff for multifamily housing, and they have to stick to it. So, if what we've got is all mansion zoning, those houses are being redeveloped. They're being redeveloped with new houses that cost $5 million or more, but that's not serving the need that we have. It's basically supporting speculation, supporting, just changing the makeup of the city to not be diverse, which I think is really a loss. I mean, what I love about Palo Alto is there's people from all over the world, there's people from all socioeconomic strata that live here. And I think it makes it a really rich, interesting community, but it's changing very rapidly. So I think the city really needs to look at its zoning. Do we have enough sites that are zoned for housing, for multifamily housing, not single-family housing? There's really nothing sacrosanct about, 6,000 square foot lots. You can have a family of 2 living on that lot. You can have some multifamily housing that's going to accommodate a lot more people. We have to talk about density.
I think next year the city council and the planning department is really going to go kind of start talking about R1 single-family neighborhoods and considering zoning changes there. But right now, as you know, they're kind of dealing with kind of some of sort of modest zoning adjustments, maybe give a little exemption for height for 100% affordable.
That's not going to do it. That's not going to do it. I'm sorry.
What about some of the bigger picture kind of solutions that they have in mind? There's the Ventura plan, which may kind of lead to the kind of zoning you were talking about, 50 units per acre, who knows? That's to be determined. And there's also some ideas in the new plan about maybe working with Stanford to generate housing along El Camino, like in Stanford Research Park and Stanford Shopping Center. I'm curious whether those kinds of things give you any hope.
Just as an aside, Stanford, it's not like we don't have any land. Stanford has an enormous amount of land, which we haven't, they have basically kept everybody's hands off that land. But even when Stanford built multifamily housing, it's very expensive. I went to see a doctor. We were chatting about housing, and she said, well, those apartments that Palo Alto built along Sand Hill Road, she couldn't afford to live there. She's a doctor. She couldn't afford the rent. What's wrong with this picture? So I see all those vehicles parked along El Camino, and I understand many of those people actually work at Stanford, and they're living in their vehicles during the week because they can't afford to rent a room, because even a room is $1,500 in Palo Alto. And why doesn't Stanford take some of that land that they only use once a year for the, for parking, and actually create just a little parking lot with bathrooms so that people could park off the street and not get tickets and get punished for being poor. I just don't see Stanford really stepping up to the plate to be part of the solution.
Well, right now they're dealing with their big general use permit process, but I think from Palo Alto's perspective, once that's over, once they're done dealing with the county on that, they can start talking to Stanford about having like larger housing complexes, like near the shopping center along El Camino, that kind of stuff.
It seems like their vision, because they mentioned this for Stanford Research Park too, would be to make something more along the lines of a Google or a Facebook, where you've got the retail and you've got the office and you've
Conference
got the
center.
housing.
Well, those companies are building company towns. We're going back to company towns. But I think it would be good to have.
What do you think of that as a solution?
It's been done. It's been done.
Yeah, isn't Palo Alto an example back in its founding days? Wasn't that a Stanford town?
Well, college towns are all, are all tied to the university. But, it just seems to me that it would be better to have housing that's available to everybody, so we have some diversity. Personally, I wouldn't want to live in, Facebook town or Google town, but not that I am qualified to do so. However, it just seems to me that there are solutions out there. What's really needed is firm will to do it, and not, endless community process where everybody will say they want absolutely nothing to change, because it's changing anyway, and it's changing in ways that I think are not good for the city of Palo Alto in terms of the loss of diversity and the loss of affordability. It's just not good.
It seems
People
like-
are moving away, small businesses are getting priced out. It's just no good all the way around. So, different cities are facing this all along the coastal areas, both on the West Coast and on the East Coast,
So you think that it is possible for Palo Alto to build the 300 units a year? That's housing, not just affordable housing.
Of course it's possible. Of course it's possible.
Just not under the current zoning.
Well, not under the current process either. I think we need a more streamlined process, and everybody who really wants affordable housing realizes you've got to streamline this thing. It can't go on forever. There's just a huge cost in this process that goes on and on and on. And then, with everybody having a say, it has to be, I think the responsibility of the city council is to think about what's the vision for the city? Is it going to be just rich people and services serving rich people, and everybody else can just come in here and work and then go home wherever, drive 2 hours to go home somewhere? Or are we going to incorporate the people that are part of this community into our housing? I mean, it's a simple question, and if they really want to do that, there's plenty of models out there for how to get it done. That's not the problem. And they have the power to do it through zoning.
It was interesting, the example that Candace Gonzalez of Palo Alto Housing gave to you for the story that you wrote of how there was a design meeting and it was like a 2-member committee.
It was in Mountain View, yeah.
In Mountain View, and they had one meeting, gave a bunch of requirements.
It's a very good process, so you hear everything
done.
from every department, what everybody's going to want. You have it right there. You know what the rules are. You're not going to get sideswiped by this community meeting and that person.
It was basically one meeting. They attached some conditions.
It's terrific,
and then,
yeah. Sunnyvale uses the same process, yeah.
And Candace also mentioned that I think it was the unincorporated San Mateo County project that they're doing. She basically said that through the process they were able to get like something she called Streamline Plus, which is kind of SB 35, like the Wiener Bill streamline process. But in addition, but they kind of went even beyond that and said, because they value so much, they want to streamline it even further. And so one of the things that she mentioned, which kind of goes to Fran's point, is that the process is extremely important, and other cities have been much more proactive about making things go as fast as possible.
That's right.
So.
Yeah. Are you hopeful because of the new state laws that
I'm
streamline?
hoping that they will respond to that appropriately, and with streamline. I mean, Palo Alto does have a very long process.
It has its own
very
name,
long.
the Palo Alto process.
Named after it.
Yeah. So, there are lots of things that they can do. So I'm hoping that I will see those changes coming through. I think right now there's such a crisis and it's not just low-income people, it's middle-income people.
The workforce.
The workforce housing, it's just a huge need. There's a need for rental housing. I think, it's going to be very difficult to build affordable home ownership housing just because of the price of land. But, the value of land is based on the vibrant economy that we have all built together by putting in good infrastructure, good schools, by having the good fortune to have Stanford down the street, and it's not just the property owners that deserve the gain from that. We all deserve to gain from that by having the kind of community we want. And that requires the city planning for that, if in fact that's what they want. So I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic, as I said, that something might come of this. And I think, the state is pushing as they should be, because it threatens the prosperity here to not have places people can afford to live.
All right. Well, any final questions here?
No, I think I'm all right, thanks.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
We'll see at the end of the year how we got
And
to
we'll all be
300.
looking to see what happens in Palo Alto.
I do think the one great thing is that they did set the 300 goal, so we could revisit this in December.
It's completely measurable.
Yeah,
so.
it's very measurable.
Yeah.
So.
All right. We'll see what they do with the process and the overlay zones in the interim. So again, Fran Wagstaff, thank you so much for being here and sharing
My
your
pleasure.
thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That wraps it up for this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. Please follow us on paloaltoonline.com If you want to talk about affordable housing, go to Town Square, which is at paloaltoonline.com/square. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And of course, you can always like us by clicking below. We'll see you next week.